accused of not being universal and not going all in like they did with the Wizarding World of Harry Potter in Orlando and soon to be here in Hollywood. And if they didn't do something, I've heard it for forever. Disneyland hasn't had a new quote unquote e-ticket attraction since Indiana Jones in 1995. For whatever reason, we as human beings were hardwired to complain. And I've just decided not to complain about it and, trust that it's going to be really, really neat. My biggest concern is that it's going to be better than everyone expects. And as a result, we're going to have an even more crowd issue than we already do. Yeah. And that would be a better problem to have as opposed to everybody hates it, the park is ruined, and no one ever goes back.
I speaking as a Star Wars fan, I am a Star Wars fan. I gotta admit, it's scary, but a good scary. Like, I'm curious, because ever since they announced it, I'm like, this could be huge. This could be big. It could change everything. Or you could have the Star Wars nerds who are going into fourth weekend scared, but still went on opening day anyway, and they loved it.
Yeah.
Going in almost like with their guard up, like, what am I expecting? What am I expecting? What am I expecting?
Yeah, I like your. It's a good. You're scared, but it's a good scared. That's a really good way to capture that.
Yeah, it's just like going into the Force Awakens, you didn't know what to expect. It's almost what this feels like on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
Because I know I listened to a podcast. I think it's Skywalking Through Neverland, actually, a good show, and they were talking about that recently on their show. Like, it's going to be big, it's going to be ridiculous, but is it going to be worth the time? I hope it is. Personally, I really do. For me, I think one of the weirdest things I've ever seen was the first time I saw Darth Vader at a Disney park on a Christmas parade. I was like, really? What am I seeing? It was so weird. So now, looking at it now, it's going to be even crazier.
Well, and if you go back and you look at the history, the first time they introduced a non-Disney intellectual property into the park by way of Star Tours in Tomorrowland in 1987, people were really freaked out about it. If you go to the introduction of Fantasmic in 1992, 1993, people were really upset that it was going to ruin the river. And, the whole idea behind New Orleans Square was that you could, sort of take this stroll down the Big E at night and it's, quiet and peaceful. And now there's going to be fireworks and laser light shows. Did we lose some things? Absolutely. I wouldn't trade a quiet stroll in New Orleans Square for Fantasmic because I think Fantasmic's the best theme park show I've ever watched. So you're going to lose some things in order to move forward, and in losing those things, you have to be willing to let them go. And I think that's one of the things that maybe Walt is underappreciated for. And what I mean by that, I always sort of marvel at the way in which he had 1 foot in history, 1 foot in nostalgia, 1 foot in yesterday. And Main Street's a perfect example of that. I mean, he opens it in 1955, and it harkens back to the turn of the century when we're between the gas lamp and the electric light. We're between the horse and the horseless carriage, meaning the automobile. And you can take that stroll down yesterday on Main Street, and then you turn right and you're in Tomorrowland. And so he always had 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the future, and he was incredibly visionary that way.
That's a very good point, actually. The funny part is we're talking Star Wars. Frozen is what took over the park the last time. And I know a lot of people were pissed off in Florida about them adding it into Epcot, what they're doing in Norway. What do you think about that situation going on in Florida? I mean, California's got its own issues with the Star Wars land. This is the Frozen controversy in Florida. It's so weird. There's so much ridiculous controversy. But what do you think on that front?
Yeah, that's another one of those deals where I liked the Frozen movie. I don't really get what all of the furor is over it, and what I mean by that is, okay, I watched it a couple of times. It was good, but now granted, I mean, our daughter was 26, so maybe if I had a 5-year-old running around, I would understand it and appreciate it a lot more. So this obsession with Frozen, I don't quite get. But I will tell you this, Blake. The 60th anniversary fireworks show that they're doing at Disneyland right now is the best fireworks show, bar none, that I have ever seen, ever experienced, ever been a part of. And so you're watching these pyrotechnics in the sky, and they're not just fireworks. It's a fully immersive experience. You stand there on Main Street, you see projections on the castle. They have all of this animation and characters going on the rooftops of Main Street. I mean, you really have to be there and fully appreciate it in terms of everything that's going on 360 around you. And so you're watching this fireworks show, and then toward the very end, they begin to play that song from Frozen, and it starts to snow on Main Street.
Wow. That's amazing.
I have never been in a crowd where I watched people respond the way that they do to that moment. In fact, we go now, I don't even watch the fireworks anymore. I stand there on Main Street and I wait for that song to start and for the snow to fall. And then I just take in the reactions and the emotion of everybody around me. And it delivers every single time. I don't get it, but I've never seen a crowd respond or react to anything like they do Frozen. And so, Disney's they're trying to figure out a way to incorporate it into places that were built long before anybody ever came up with the idea of a movie called Frozen. And what I would say, and it's interesting that you brought this up in the context of Star Wars. Maybe we just need to let it go a little bit. Maybe we just need to trust that everything is going to be okay. Disney knows what they're doing. They've got our best interest at heart, or maybe their best interest, which means putting out the best product possible so that we'll keep consuming it over and over and over again. And we don't have to be frozen in time, if you will, and stuck with the way things used to be in the past.
And to answer your question about Frozen, I have a 7-year-old, like I said. He was 5 when that came out. And he fell in love with Olaf. So I've been dealing with in summer all year long, all the time. So that's how I deal with it in this house. But even though if I could have a little Olaf next to a little BB-8 on my desk, I'd be very, very happy.
Well, it's interesting. First of all, I love Olaf because I hate hot weather. And so I just love his character and everything that he's able to do. But we went and saw, the new Star Wars Force Awakens movie, and everyone's in love with BB-8. And I get it. The first thing my wife Nikki said when we came out of that theater is BB-8 is a droid version of Olaf.
That's so true.
And she's right.
That's so true. That's funny.
I mean, even the way in which the head moves on the body, it's exactly like Olaf. And I never saw it, but she pointed it out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're 100% correct.
That's so true. I didn't think of that. That's very true.
Yeah.
Wow. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, go back and watch Olaf. Go back and watch BB-8. They're almost the same character.
It's kind of scary. You're right. Except BB-8 doesn't talk. I feel the difference.
Right.
That's crazy. Wow, that's a good comparison. All right. I want to go back to something I had in my notes. I kind of got sidetracked. I actually wanted to know, where did the idea come up with the Walt Disney quotes? Because I thought that's really cool to start each chapter with a good Disney quote. Because I know, like, on Twitter, I follow a Disney quote Twitter account. And every single time, I just have to retweet the Walt Disney ones. So, what's your idea with the Walt Disney quotes at the top of the chapters?
Well, I had wanted for a really long time to do a book. The idea for the book actually goes back way farther than even the history of Disneyland College course. I had wanted to do a book with this idea that, Disneyland, if you idea, if you will, of, everything I ever needed to know, I learned at Disneyland, which is not the book I wanted to write, if for no other reason, versions of that already exist, and I, didn't want to do a clone of it. But that was sort of the basis of the idea. And then eventually that sort of morphed into, the park is an extension of Walt himself and all of his visions and all of his dreams and all of his ideas. And so eventually it, went from, everything I ever needed to know I learned at Disneyland to what, came to be the wisdom of Walt, and realizing that all of the different points that some quote or some talking point out of Walt himself. And so, and I would love to tell you, I was doing this or I was sitting here. I just came to the realization that each one of these lessons, meaning the chapters, if you will, had a quote attached to it that would bring that lesson home from the very beginning of each chapter. And, credit to Dave Smith, the, Disney archivist, his book, The Quotable Walt, was a huge resource in going through as many Walt Disney quotes as possible and then ultimately attaching them to the lead of the different chapters.
All right, then. I actually personally like it because I might actually use some of those quotes on things of my own, like I usually do. Because I just like those kind of things. It's very inspirational to hear from the man himself. The man, the myth,
yes.
Disney. That's how I look at it. All right.
Well, and then to see how some of those ideas actually would get executed in his life and then ultimately in Disneyland itself.
It's very true. It's very, very, very true. All right. I have these last two things on here because I'm just curious. And for this first question, don't say a bench because that would avoid it. It would put a whole chapter in the book I want people to read because it was really well done. What is, for you, when you go to the park, what's your favorite attraction you have to do when you're there?
Well, my favorite all-time attraction is Space Mountain. And unfortunately, I have not been able to ride Space Mountain for almost 2 years now because when we went for the follow-up after my brain tumor surgery, I mistakenly asked the question, hey, when can I go back to Disneyland? And you have to realize, we put the surgery off for 2 months so that I could teach this history of Disneyland class. And so, the neurosurgeon at Cedars-Sinai, he's like, oh my gosh, it's this Disneyland guy again. And, he was done. And so when I said, when can I go back to Disneyland? And he's like, to do what? And I'm like, well, to ride rides. Unfortunately, I'm on a 2-year hiatus. Oh, okay. So I have to wait for everything to heal and recover from that, pretty invasive surgery 2 years ago. So my favorite attraction is Space Mountain, and I will be riding it at 8:01 a.m. on July 24th of 2016. So we're counting down the days and counting down the months.
Well, there you go. Very cool. Very, very cool. And here's a question for you. If you at Disneyland, if you could have any job, I know for me, I'd like to be a character just so I can greet kids. For any time, what would it be? Any job at Disneyland for you? What would you want to do?
That is a phenomenal question, and I say that because my wife and I, we play this game where we take all of the people that we know and we cast them in different jobs and different roles at Disneyland. If money were no object, I would love to be a Disneyland tour guide. And quite frankly, part of the idea of wanting to teach a course on the history of Disneyland, we take a field trip to the park, and so I get to live my dream of being a Disneyland tour guide by taking these students and their friends and their family members around the park for a day. But to be honest with you, the real job that I covet is Jungle Cruise skipper. I would love to captain a Jungle Cruise boat.
That's funny, actually. That made me chuckle. That's good.
and to be honest with you, Blake, I'd be lucky if I kept my job one full turn around the river because I would end up with some joke saying something to somebody that upset or offended the entire boat, but I would like just one shot at it.
That's good. Oh, that's good. All right, before we start wrapping up, because we've been talking for a while, why don't you give everyone one big plug for the book, for everyone to pick it up, because I could say everything, but it's coming from you, it's a whole different story. So one big plug for your book. Go for it.
Okay. So The Wisdom of Walt, Leadership Lessons from the Happiest Place on Earth is a #1 bestseller on a little place called Amazon. and you can go there and you can pick it up in hard copy. It is also available there as a Kindle ebook, and it